Hello, my name is Cathy and I live in Great Yarmouth. And before I say anything else, I would just like to say a big thank you to everyone who showed an interest in my video. I was actually overwhelmed by the response and everyone was so kind as well. And I've had fantastic comments and I've not had an opportunity to respond to all of them, but I have read them all. And obviously that's got a lot to do with other YouTubers sort of promoting me, which was lovely of them, and I'll come back to that in a bit. But the other thing I wanted to say is there's some people that would say, you know, this is all just conspiracy. There is a logical explanation, and I would say, yes, there is a logical explanation, but it's being deliberately hidden from us, and that makes it a conspiracy. They are conspiring to hide the truth. That isn't a question, it's a fact, because all the paperwork, all the books, all the scrolls that are in the vaults of the Vatican should be uploaded on a computer. There's no excuse for that information to be hidden from us. None whatsoever, unless there's something to hide. Now, Heritage are just as bad, and I know that Heritage are hiding things, even on small, sort of more rural scales. They are hiding things. And I'll give you a for instance. I've looked quite a lot into the wall that goes around Yarmouth, which dates back to 12 to 1300s. And there was one particular day that I was by the wall taking photos as I was going along. And a woman walking her dog, elderly lady, she said to me, there used to be gargoyles up on that wall. And I looked at her and I said, did there? And she said, yeah. She said, see where those holes are? And I looked and I saw what she meant. She said they were all gargoyles. She said, but Heritage came and took them all away, and they never put them back again. I don't know what happened to them. Now, when I come home, I had a search all through Heritage, and not only is there never, ever, ever a mention of the gargoyles ever being on the wall, but there's no sign of where they've gone, and I have no reason to doubt this lady's memory of them being there. It's not the only instance that I know that Heritage have deliberately hidden things. Now, I'm using the phrase Heritage. I know the name of the person who heads Heritage around here, and I know that it is him specifically who hides it. I'm not saying that everyone who's employed by him is hiding things, but certainly he is, because I can name 2 other things that I know I have discovered about that wall that have been deliberately hidden, and they were deliberately hidden under his jurisdiction, and it's not mentioned in documents. One of them is to do with a well that I know was there, that's been covered up, never ever ever mentioned. And there are lots of historians who have written about the wall, so they would have gathered all the information they could from different books, but the books that are available do not mention the gargoyles or the well, and the other thing they don't mention is how far down that wall goes. Now, I know those things. So it is a deliberate act to hide the truth. So I think it's wonderful that people can see that something happened, but what they need to see is that the truth does exist. It's just not being made available to us. And that means that you can't tuck it away and say, well, history is history, it's all in the past, because the secret and the hiding of it is current. It's here today. And with everything going on today, There needs to be clarity. And if they can't provide clarity about our history, we have absolutely no reason to trust them today. So I just thought that I would put that out there because I know those things to be true. So, my last video was about churches and how they lend themselves to the possibility of being geothermal power plants. That may sound unrealistic, but what I was really trying to build up to is the fact that there has to have been some kind of energy provision in the past. It accounts for so much of the architecture that we see, makes so much more sense of so many things if electricity was available. And also the consequence of consecutive blowouts, if they were thermal plants, would have been the mud floods. All of the mud obviously coming up from underground, and I spoke about the water as it condenses back down, it's going to be full of minerals, and it would sink into porous things and turn them to stone quite quickly. And obviously that's evidence that something along those lines potentially has happened. I'm not trying to convince anyone that my theory is right and other people's are wrong. This is just something that I pieced together, and if you know something that I don't, then obviously share it with me. I've got no qualms about being incorrect. I would like to get to the truth. I'd like to work out the truth. So I would keep open-minded, and I would suggest that you do too. Elon Musk has said we might live in a simulation. I disagree. On the basis that Elon Musk said it is really enough for me to make me want to disagree. But I can see the potential for altering time. Now that may be a bit of a leap considering where I came from in the first video, which may have come across as being very practical and logical, but I've put together a very practical and logical way that time could be altered, but not in the way that we've been led to believe. Not some huge time shift, and not people sort of travelling through time. And I think a lot of the problem is that we've been made to think of things slightly off kilter. So even when things are right in front of us, we can't see it. We can't manipulate our mind to see what it is that our senses are telling us. So time travel, in my concept of it, wouldn't involve one giant leap worldwide. It's more that it can be achieved in pockets of places and tweaked and altered. It's something that I will go into in more depth, but it's because it comes across as such a wacky idea that I think it needs slow progression. So the point is I was starting off with, look, this is how electricity could be developed, because it would need an immense amount of energy to actually time travel. A wind farm wouldn't cut it. Now we've got all forms of different ways of producing electricity, and here's the thing. We have enough ways of producing electricity, because it's really not that complex, that I don't understand why we would ever need nuclear power plants. This is how simple it is to produce electricity. So if we were producing, so if for instance the churches, like I said, were all power plants, each one of them would be able to provide absolutely sufficient electricity for a smaller area. This, for instance, is just the way the water runs. So the water comes down here, turns the turbine, there's the generator, there's the power. And of course you can recycle that water. So it's just very easy, and once you've got it up and running, it's not hugely expensive. Obviously you've got to take care of it as well, but it isn't hugely expensive. And it prevents the need for mining for uranium for the power plants, which is a lot more complex. So this is the layout of Chernobyl power plant, and you can see there's a cross shape there. Cross does not make it a holy structure. And Chernobyl power plant was named after a plant called wormwood, and you probably all know that because once Chernobyl had gone up, I think someone realised that the word Chernobyl is wormwood. It is an odd thing to do, because the town it's in is Pripyat. It's Chernobyl itself, the actual building, that's called wormwood. So, which obviously is a plant. So naming a power plant after a plant does seem an odd thing to do. And in particular, in Revelations, it states that wormwood was a star that fell on water bodies, making them bitter and killing many. I think it was a third of the world. Wormwood is used as an ingredient in the spirit absinthe, and the use of absinthe is regulated because it can produce psychedelic experiences. But we'll come back to that, but I just wanted to make that point so that it's in your mind when I come back to it. Now, after I'd posted my last video, Sandy123, who's an angel, and if she makes any comments, give her a thumbs up, because she does a lot of work. And I've said to her, you know, you ought to make videos, Sandy, but she doesn't feel comfortable doing that, so she sends me lots of information, and I really, really appreciate it, Sandy. Anyway, she sent me a few links, and the links were really backing up what I said before. So let me just go to those. I think it was this one first. So she come across this, and this was dated 2018. The pride of St. Patrick's Cathedral is underground. This is Geoffrey Murphy, who led the team overseeing the restoration of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan in the geothermal plant under the church campus. So above ground, a 7,855 pipe organ is one of great splendours of St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue, the luminous church that will be the heart of the action in New York on St. Patrick's Day. But hidden below the cathedral's floor, a new system of pipes just as intricate is a source of equal pride. A year ago, as part of its nearly £2 million renovation, St. Patrick's Cathedral launched a state-of-the-art geothermal heating and cooling system. Now, it goes on, I've read through the article and I'm not going to read any more. But I was just quite blown away by that, oh look, you know, that there's a church being used exactly the way that I imagined they would be able to be used. And they don't mention in any of this that they're actually generating electricity. They don't say they're not, they just don't mention it. I suppose they don't want to sort of advertise the fact that it's that simple. I say it's that simple, but these are the wells that have had to be dug. They're 2,200 feet below the church. But like I say, a church is kind of set up really to do that. And I don't think they'd have spent £2 million on doing that just so that they could have heating. I'm quite certain it is developing electricity, and they're probably selling it off to the Rockefeller Tower that is situated, I believe, opposite it. But anyway, so yeah, I'll just show you the pictures. So you've got the heating vents behind the votive candles. And of course, none of that has been changed, so you wouldn't know that there's a geothermal plant in action there. Now, this says as well that it's a 138-year-old cathedral. I just wanted to point out, I've looked into this building. Before it was a cathedral, the building was still there, and it was being used as an orphanage. And before that, the building was there, and I think it was the Jesuits who were given credit for building it. So the building has been altered, but so the building itself is a lot older than 138 years. And that's quite often the case. You know, they say this church was built on this date, but I think you know well, you can't trust any dates. So yeah. Oh, another thing I saw, this is a manhole cover covering up one of the wells. And I thought I might take a trip over to the church graveyard, because there's no church gardens where I live. It is just a graveyard. But it'd be interesting to see, and I would urge all of you to do that, just to go and have a look and see if you can find anything like this around and about near the churches, because if you can, that would just kind of secure more evidence that the churches were all being used in this way previously. So that's that one. And just quickly, there's this one as well. Again, credit to Sandy. See, I have no idea how long she must have trawled the internet to find these. It's amazing. Anyway, Mac Morrison, a parishioner at the Church of Incarnation in Oakville, switches on the church's new geothermal system. And this is quite a long document about going green and other things that they've done. But somewhere in here, and I couldn't find it when I was getting ready to upload this, but somewhere in here he says something along the lines of, it's almost as if the tower was built to be a chimney because of how well it draws up. What a coincidence! Almost as if it was built for that purpose. Excellent. And I think there was one more as well. Yeah, I think there was another church one. That's the one I've just looked at. Oh yeah, here it is. It's got a load. And so this is a third one. Mount Olive Lutheran Church undergoing construction for the transition to a geothermal heating and cooling system. Again, they're going to be using it for electricity as well. Why wouldn't you, after spending all that money? But this particular church, I thought it's quite funny that they've also got 40 kilowatt rooftop solar panels for electricity. Yeah, and they're going to use the geothermal as well. But hey, what about that? What a find. Well done, Sandy. So, moving on. So, what does the word church actually mean? So I'm going to go through words today, because I've sort of discovered something a little bit odd about words. Of course, we've got this quote, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What is the Word? The Word and its intent. And what I've discovered is, words don't describe structures. They describe purpose, performance, and intent, but they don't describe structures. And you may have already known that. I certainly didn't. It's taken me a little while for that to click. So we're encouraged to label everything as if it was, as if the solid item is the purpose. This, for instance, what you're looking at is a tool used for brushing hair. If everyone in the world became hairless, then this would no longer be a hairbrush. But we think of things as if they are their purpose. So ship, for instance, is a word for the act of moving something from one place to another. It is not the name of a boat. The word ship only tells us the purpose of the vessel, the reason it was built. Latin word for ship is navis, which tells us that the Romans were not shipping goods. They were navigating or travelling in a deliberate direction. The navy are today's navigators. A navy ship tells us it has a dual purpose, so it's navigating and moving things from one place to another. The nave in a church is the part that you walk down. Navis, navigate, travel. So this is a nave of a church, the point of travel from entrance to the crossing. So if we have a look here, you've got it labelled here. So this is the crossing, so this is the nave that you navigate. So there's other words linked with this. So you've got navel, which is a depression. Excuse me. It's a depression at the axial base of a spiral shell. It's also the word for a hub of a wheel. The depression left behind after separation from the umbilical cord. You see, now if I just said navel, you think it's a thing, and that thing you think it is your belly button. It's not. It's a depression. And that's how words transfer. That's how purposes transfer. So the umbilicus, a point in a surface through which all lines of curvature pass. So really what it's describing, the axial base of a spiral shell, is the beginning of the spirals that are going to move and allow for growth. And the hub of a wheel is the point where it pushes the wheel around. So it's how the wheel is allowed to move. And the umbilicus is, again, it's that point where your life begins, because that's where you're getting your nourishment from when you're in the womb. And so you begin to spiral out. And this is how meanings transpose. So you've got the word current, which means movement, flow in a specific direction. So you've got water current, electrical current, a current card, a current account, and current as in today, because we are moving in a specific direction through time. And I think this is a psychological trick. So I've sort of wanted to bring this up because I try to think of how does it affect me? What is the difference between me seeing a thing and labelling it, and seeing a thing and recognizing it as an object with a purpose? So they can present ways of thinking and it gets fixed as an idea. And then you'll use that as a barrier to hide the truth from yourself. And I can see how that works. You see, nobody can make you frightened. I suppose they can if they come at you with a bat. But I mean, verbally, no one can make you frightened. But they can put ideas in your head so you frighten yourself. And that is far more effective if you can frighten yourself. And Derren Brown demonstrates that in his series Apocalypse. And if you haven't seen that, at least go and listen to him talk about it, because he explains how he makes people draw conclusions for themselves, how he sort of puts subliminal ideas into their heads, so they terrify themselves. The fact is that nothing is solid or fixed or final. Every material has a resonance, so it's not solid. It all moves through time, so it's not fixed. It will change through wear or tear. The material can be broken down and used to make something different. Therefore, it's not in its final form. And it might sound like an irrelevant point, but you could say a thing is what it does. And there you have it, because that's exactly how they want you to think, because that translates to, what does Jack do for a living? Oh, he's a banker. Oh, he is a banker, and therefore good with money. What does John do for a living? Oh, he's unemployed. Therefore, he is nothing, worthless. And that's what we're doing. Because we objectify things and lose their purpose, we objectify people and we fail to see their purpose. The word church. Google says the word church is derived from the Greek cont, meaning the Lord's house. Now this sounds plausible at first, but there's just one problem. The Greek word cont is, and I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but it's not used in the scriptures. The Greek word ecclesia is. Ecclesia and eclectic, that they have sort of a transferable meaning. So the word church is neither Hebrew nor Greek. When these languages were translated into English Bibles, the word church was already in existence. The Greek word used in the renewed covenant for church is ecclesia, which basically means called out ones. Ecclesia does not refer to a building, but rather a group of people. The word ecclesia is related to eclectic, which means wide-ranging and diverse. Chinese word for church is jiao-hu, and again, I'm not pronouncing that right. Jiao means meeting, conference, society, that kind of thing. Hui means teach, teaching, religious, instruct. So even in China, the word for church is not about the structure. Ecclesia is a diverse group of people who are like-minded. So this group here, who have gathered, is an ecclesia. So, church. Now, Jack Streaming recently put a video out at the Victorians, Were We a Zombified Workforce Revisited? And I will put the link in the description, but it's she knows a lot more about this subject than I do. But Dutch word for church is kerk, the German Kirche, and the Scots kirk all come from Old Saxon's kirkia, which in turn comes from the word Kirche or Circe. And of course Circe was also the name of a character in Game of Thrones, and she was not nice. Kirche or Circe was a goddess of sorcery and pharmakia, who was skilled in the magic of transmutation, illusion, and necromancy. Pharmakia was the use of administration of drugs, generally thought of as poison. Transmutation means to transform one thing into another, and the goddess Kirche was famed for turning her enemies into animals, notably pigs. Illusion can be created with the administration of psychedelic drugs, and necromancy is the raising of the dead, and can be related to the historic use of pharmaceuticals, and that is exactly what Jack Streaming's video was about, the use of pharmaceuticals to create a zombified workforce. Today, the raising of the dead, zombies, always begins at graveyards because the graveyards are found at a church. So, Cath'y. The Greeks attribute the invention of the circus to her. They claim it was done to honour her father, the sun, Helios, hence the term Cirque du Soleil in French, or in English, Church of the Sun, Circus of the Sun, Circuit of the Sun, electrical circuit. Magical Circe, magic circle, magnetic circuit. Pharmacia today, so pharmaceuticals, because we still use the same kind of word, the language you'll find threads all the way through. So knowing or having a reasonable understanding of what a word means really does help when you're trying to work out what the basis of it is. And what I tend to do is I do look on Google, but I never ever stop there. I've got 2 different etymology books, so I look at those, and then if I still am struggling, then I'll go online and look at other sites that are sort of dedicated to etymology. It's always worth finding out, and that's why I found out that when you actually get to the root of every word, it's about the purpose. It's always going to be about the purpose. I mean, it's a simple thing like, I don't know, tap. A tap is tapping into the water supply. That's why it's a tap. Everything has a purpose, and it's named after the purpose. Anyway, pharmaceuticals. A substance used in the diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of disease and for restoring, correcting, or modifying organic functions. That's our pharmaceuticals today. Transmutation today. Nuclear transmutation is the conversion of one chemical element or an isotope into another chemical element, and it still bears a relationship with the sun. Moving on. Power plant versus church. So there are 4 points that I'm going to go through now that I didn't go through in the previous video, and those 4 points are things where the 2 are different from each other. It's, what's the difference between them? So I've gone through a lot of things, a power plant needs this and a church has that, and so on. And I just want to finish that off. So the 4 points. Number 1, we don't bury people in the grounds of power plants. And this takes me to the beginning of my investigation about 3 years ago. So it's a good time to give a big thank you to Paul Cook and Rebel Without a Pause for mirroring my work. And thank you, Autodidactic, for bringing the video to people's attention. I was so touched, really was. And it was Mick from Rebel Without a Pause who introduced me to Mudflood, and he'd posted a video that posed the question, where are all the gravestones of people who died before the 1800s? Now, I messaged him, and I smartly answered, graveyards are overturned every 100 years or so. To which Mick responded, but the bones have to be placed somewhere. Where are they? So I went to St Nicholas Church, Great Yarmouth, and I went to my local church, which was originally founded in 1101. And Mick was right. Aside from a few headstones dated in the late 1700s, they were all 1800s onwards. Now that means all the people that died in the 1100s, 1200s, 13, 14, 15, 16, and the most of the 1700s were all missing. So, official narrative over time. Starting around the 7th century, churches had complete control over burials. This meant that most burials took place in the graveyards adjacent to the church. But as the population grew over time, graveyard space became limited. This is when cemeteries unaffiliated with churches came into being. But the cemeteries I've looked at, the gravestones are largely 1800s plus. So where are the older graves? To my understanding, bones removed from a church cemetery should end up in an ossuary. This is Skull Chapel in Poland. But when I looked at the history of Skull Chapel, I found that it didn't house the deceased from a church cemetery. The chapel was built in 1776 by a Bohemian local parish priest, Václav. It's the mass grave of people who died during the 30 Years' War, 3 Sicilian Wars, as well as of people who died because of cholera epidemics, plagues, syphilis and hunger. He, Václav, with a gravedigger, collected the bones, cleaned them, and put them in the chapel over an 18-year period. I have no idea what I think about whether that's true or not. The walls of this small Baroque church are filled with 3,000 skulls, and there are also bones of another 21,000 people interred in the basement. So as you can see, the chapel was built in 1776, but it was to house people who died long before that. So the church itself has nothing, and the ossuary itself, it wasn't collecting bones from local churches right there, fill up, and you know, we're going to have to sort of turn the ground now. So that's not what it was doing. So this is a chandelier made of bones in the Sedlec ossuary in the Czech Republic. I don't feel comfortable with this myself. I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm not sure that that's a mark of respect. But anyway, the bones are not from a church cemetery. The bones are dating back to 1278. It was around 1400 a Gothic church was built in the centre of the cemetery. So there's no church, just a cemetery, and then the Gothic church is built. And it has a vaulted upper level and a lower chapel to be used as an ossuary for the mass graves unearthed during the construction. 4 enormous bell-shaped mounds occupy the corner of the chapel. So again, it's not, here's the church, now we'll start burying people around it. Not working that way. And this reminds me of the catacombs in Paris, you know, and what they've done there with all of those bones. Just find it odd. Catacombs are found in Turkey, Africa, Italy, Germany, Ukraine, Sicily, and many more. And unlike ossuaries, a catacomb has no obvious association with a religious structure. This is the Tower of Skulls in Serbia. So the problem is that ossuaries seem to have nothing to do with church cemeteries. So San Bernardino in Milan, this ossuary, it was in 1210 when an adjacent cemetery ran out of space. A room was built to hold bones, and a church was later attached in 1269. So they're building a room to put the bones in. I really don't understand what's going on here. Anyway, not heritage, nor local historians, nor historic records kept in the library could answer to when the older bones were removed from St. Nicholas Church, or indeed where they might be now. It's an odd thing to lose. There's no reason why those records should be gone. because the church, despite undergoing different alterations, it's been there since the 1100s. So, Mick, this is for you, mate. In answer to the question, all this time later, where are all the older graves? And in answer to my number 1 on my list, the older bones are not in the churchyards. And I don't think they ever were, mainly because the building, when constructed, was not designed for use as a religious building. But in using it as a cemetery, they can bury anything they like and nobody will go digging. And the missing bones are quite likely to be found beneath children's playgrounds and local parks, because that is the kind of mentality they have. So I just wanted to show you, you know, when I listened back to the last video, I noticed how often I say, I might slap myself every time I do it. I don't know I'm doing it. Here we go. So, I just wanted to look at this Norfolk Heritage Explorer. So this is official Norfolk.gov UK. And it's about St Nicholas Church. So like I said, founded in 1101. However, it's interesting to note that whilst Manship states that the chapel was constructed in 1101 and the church started in 1123, this is contradicted by most other sources. And I find that an incredible amount of structures in Great Yarmouth have a real contradiction on when it was built and what happened to it. And sometimes you look at the pictures and you think, well, it's labelled as that, but it actually doesn't bear any resemblance to it at any given point in time. It's a really tough one. But the other point I wanted to make is that the St Nicholas Priory, which was a satellite of the chapter of Norwich, because as you're probably aware, you get a city and then the towns sort of feed off of that, and the city tends to have come first, and for me that will be the city of Norwich. St Nicholas Priory, a satellite of the chapter of Norwich. But anyway, that's not really what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say is this, because this is really bizarre. Bearing in mind who's writing this is Heritage. See if you can make sense of this one. So, this is John Sell Cotman. He's in the 1800s. He did this etching. But look at that door. Yeah? Buried. And this is what Heritage have to say about it. They noticed that door's buried. So it's the oldest building in Great Yarmouth, because like I said, you know, in the first video, you find the geyser, you find the spring, you build around it, then you've got your source of power, and then the town builds up from that. So as the oldest building in Great Yarmouth, the level of the doorway to the church probably represents the ground level in 1101. The ground level inside the walls in Great Yarmouth has built up several metres over time, including inside the churchyard. Is this making sense to you? I mean, how does that happen when the church is constantly used? And how are these graves on top? How are you performing service? You can't get in through the door. So how are you doing a funeral service and them burying people, it doesn't make very much sense at all. However, the modern ground level is not the accumulation of several hundred years. The ground level in the churchyard was lowered by 4 feet in 1883. So they dug it out. That's what they're saying. In 1883, they had to dig out the periphery of this church, despite the fact that people were living there. Nobody thought, what were they doing? These are people, and how are they getting in there? This just nuts. Evidence of the build-up of ground can be seen at the west wall alongside Northcote Street, along the north wall of the churchyard, and in this drawing by John Sell Cotman. The Victorian restoration still leaves 6 feet of made-up ground on top of the natural sands. So, they're admitting that pretty much all of Yarmouth is like 6 feet underground, but it apparently built up over time. Even the houses that were built outside the wall, that apparently weren't built until 1800, have still managed to find themselves 6 feet underground, because that's where the basement level is, and it wasn't built as basements. So yeah, I just thought that was quite entertaining, really. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I don't know how they've got away with passing it off as making sense. There will come a time that I meet this person. Our paths will cross. I know our paths will cross. And I'm looking forward to that, Darren. I am looking forward to meeting you one day. So, let's move on. So, number 2 on my list. That took a long time, number 1, didn't it? A power plant has a generator. A church has an altar. So, at a geothermal power plant, wells are drilled 1 or 2 miles deep into the earth to pump steam or hot water to the surface. The steam spins the turbine, which is connected to a generator. That produces electricity. The steam cools off in a cooling tower and condenses back to water. The electricity generated is direct current, DC. It changes to alternating current when it reaches our homes or offices. Alternating current. Alter. In simple terms, an alternating current is the pulsing of direct current, and this is achieved by interruption of the electrical flow. There are different ways that this can be achieved, but I won't go through that today. So here you can see how that's achieved. So instead of one magnet spinning around and the copper coils collecting the energy, it's got these breaks in it. So although that's going to go around quite fast, those breaks will be picked up in between. So that's how alternating current is created. It's just that. And the word alter is not just different. It doesn't mean different, but it's got an element of reversal to it. So alternating current is alternating the polarity of the direct current. And that's all you have to do to alter the polarity. So it's quite important to see how this works, because this is the way that electricity is used in communications. And I am actually going somewhere with all this. So it's a series of pauses that forces the current to die down and receive, creating a backflow, and then the current is pushed forward again. And the best way I can describe it is if you pull back your arm to punch a wall, that's going to be direct. When you're looking at alternating current, it's like a series of little punches, but you'll realise you've got to pull your arm back and forwards and back and forwards and back and forwards. It's that kind of flow. So communications, communion. So another way to describe this is like a series of on, off, on, off, on, off. And in communications, we use this form of interrupt to great effect. Now, computer code 01 is just straight out interrupt code. It can be interpreted to read on, off, on, off, on, which would be the same as 10111001. The on is even in the word one. It's the same principle as Morse code. So our voice can be transmitted in the same way using frequency through the tone of our voice. Because if you think about it, when we speak, we are stopping at the end of each sentence. We're leaving a pause, but we're leaving a kind of semi-pause in between each word, and an even smaller pause between syllables of words. So we're using that kind of stop, start, stop, stop, start. And when you've got like here a series of ones, that's when you're going to have a sort of longer word. And it really is just that principle. And that is how, the original sort of computer codes were written. So transmitter and receiver and auxiliary port. So in electronics and communications, a transmitter is an electronic device which produces radio waves. The transmitter itself generates a radio frequency alternating current, which we've just gone through. So that's what it's doing. It's generating for radio an alternating current, and that's applied to the antenna. When excited by this alternating current, the antenna radiates radio waves out that carry the encoded sound of voice or music, etc. Now the receiver at the other end, radio receiver, is the opposite of a radio transmitter. It uses an antenna which is going to be at a different level, so you'll need two at different levels if you're going to send and receive. So it's an antenna to capture radio waves, and it processes those waves to extract only those vibrating at the desired frequency. So it extracts the audio signals that were added to those waves, and it amplifies the audio signals and plays them on a speaker. So then you need the auxiliary port, which is a standard communications port, and it accommodates for headphones, microphones, and the speakers. The transept in a church is this centerpiece. So you've navigated down here, and now you've got the transept. And transept is actually a word that relates to transmit and intercept. So it's to listen in. Intercept, obstruct something so as to prevent them from continuing to a destination. That's what interception is. Transept, as in a church. Transport. Sept, as in septum. Obstructing, separating two chambers, such as that between the nostrils and the chambers of the heart. So transept is something between these two, or an intermingle of transmit and intercept. And I can't think of why a church calls this area a transept. So what I'm really suggesting now, if you haven't already realised, is that a church wasn't just generating electricity. It was doing something else as well. Now, auxiliary altars, they're here. See, this side, auxiliary, which is for, auxiliary is for speakers, sound, things like that. And this is alternator, auxiliary. So, yeah, some very strange language in churches if they're not doing this and never did do this. And of course the main altar, which I'm saying is an alternator. Auxiliary altars are dedicated to particular saints, usually in this part, and they're often erected at each end of the transept, so here and possibly over here as well. So potentially receiving different signals, maybe. I mean, because this is where I'm sort of questioning. I'm looking at what the possibilities are, but considering the language, the spiritual language, the saints, I'm not entirely sure what is going on. And of course we had the apse, which was right at the end, and I should have pointed that out in the picture. Apse is absintinated. Getting tongue-tied now. So the definition, impregnated with wormwood, as in wine and other alcoholic beverages. So it almost seems that these communications required a certain frame of mind. I am wondering, because I looked into Chernobyl a lot, and I concluded that that was not an accident. It was always meant to happen. I've got my own reasons why I think that is the case, and what the actual purpose of it happening was, but that's for another time. But anyway, I think Chernobyl was also a nod to the simultaneous event of all these power plants erupting, and I think that is the wormwood that the Bible speaks of, when all of these churches backfired, and that's when the waters were poisoned. That's when the bells were ringing out because of the high pressure. That's the angels, I believe, were signalling. I'm not sure, but I think the angels were blowing their horns at that time. But apse is this word, and I failed to find a single other word that even translate to that. It's not like it could be this or this. Couldn't find a single thing. And mostly, initially when I was searching for what does apse mean, I was just getting, it might mean this, it might mean that, until I found out it does mean absinthiated. Now a radio, because we've talked a lot about radio frequencies, a radio doesn't require a whole building itself. You don't need a whole building to run a radio. But television, which uses the same basic alternating current, does require a whole building. You get the whole BBC studios. And here we find links to that Circe, the magic illusion circus. So, number 3, power plants don't have spires. Well, communications require tall towers to send and receive signals, and spires would serve the purpose. But what is a spire? Repent and let every one of you be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins, and you shall receiver, the gift of the Holy Spirit. So the Latin root word spire means breath, in reference to the breath of life. Spiral comes from this word, and all life follows that growth of the spiral. This root is the word origin of inspire, respiration, and expire. So the Old English spur and Middle Dutch spire and German spur relate to sprig or sprout, as in newly formed life. So this relationship between electricity and life is, I believe, why we still call the complex that creates electric a plant, i.e. a power plant. So from the Latin word spire, we also get the word spy, as in to watch or to see. So I think there's a lot going on there. And I do wonder if they were actually communicating with another dimension or time, or possibly allowing spirits to pass into this realm to house their body. And is that what sacrifice is really about? And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of rituals, particularly in royalty, where you've got all the headgear and all the different kind of devices. And I'm really not sure what they're about, but they'll be about something. And of course the crown is associated with the sun. And again, you've got the Helios, and I mentioned Helios before. Helios, the hole, the well, holy, all of those things seem to be embodied with that same vibration. And that's really what these words are about, is the vibration. So the queen or king, whoever is being coronated, they usually change their name and their persona. It's all about God, it's all about religion, but they change their persona and their name. And of course there's this ritualistic oil. I mean, is the wormwood to do with the oil, the ritualistic oil that they have? I don't know. Number 4, or lastly, all churches are built with their altars facing slightly off east, and that's very specific, and there must be a reason. There's speculation that it might be related to praying towards the sun, or it might be that they, the Christians, thought Jesus would come from the east, but I think it's odd that something clearly so important has been forgotten. The only structures we have to worry about what direction is important are satellites. And in the UK, there's a dominant satellite broadcaster, so nearly all the dishes tend to point in the same direction, close to southeast. Now, do you remember I mentioned that phrase used by Heritage, that St. Nicholas Church is a satellite church of Norwich Cathedral? Satellite, from the Latin satellum, means follower. So other words used in church that relate to electric, and I'm almost heading towards wrapping up. So, an anode and cathode are defined in terms of function, not structure, and they can be interchangeable. And a good way to think of an anode and cathode is, it's a little bit like, when I've said before about you drive 2 wells underground. One of them's your injection well to feed water into it, the other one's feeding steam up. You could just as easy just sort of do it the other way round. Use well A instead of well B for the injection well and let the steam come up that way. And that's really the anode-cathode thing. That's what they're doing. They're creating a circuit. One's drawing up and the other one's taking down. Because obviously without the circuit you haven't got the electricity. It has to form a circuit. So that's what the anode and cathode are doing. But they're just names to sort of identify what they're doing at that moment. It depends on what materials you're using or how thick the materials are to which one is more practically going to be the anode or the cathode. They're not made of specific things. It's how they are functioning that gives them their name. However, As I say, there are exceptional devices where the function is locked to the structure, where you might label the structure as anode or cathode because only one direction of current flow makes sense. And a diode is such an example. A diode is a two-terminal structure that only ever allows things to flow in one direction. Cathedral, cathode. Diocese, diode. Cathedral definition: the principal church of a diocese. Diocese, administration or organizer, ensures everyone is moving in the same direction. Is there some kind of esoteric personification of electrical function going on here? I'm thinking of the people acting out the roles of parts of an electrical machine, a kind of combined AI. I don't know what's going on here. I can't pretend to know what the ultimate function was of the churches. I can say I'm really confident that they were generating electricity, that they was some form of communication, but communication with who, I don't know. I don't get the impression from the language that we're talking about TV. There may have been, and I'm sure there was, considering the organ, some forms of entertainment and circus-like entertainment going on there. But there seems to be a whole lot more going on as well. And I just wondered, because if they're, if the diocese is actually personifying the movement and the behaviour of the diode, then are other people taking on other roles? Because if you've got a machine, once you've set it up, you can predict the outcome of an event before you even press the start button. So, yeah, I don't know, just something to think about. Font, fontana. Latin word for a spring or a small fountain. Fontanelle, soft spots in a baby's skull. Now, the official version of why a baby's skull is, the soft spots are called a fontanelle, is why these soft spots got in the skull got this name is not certain, possibly from pulsations felt at these points. But I looked into it myself, and I'm thinking, or it could be that the font isn't so much a word for fountain, but a word for vulnerable or thin vowel, because the soft spot is where the skull hasn't yet knitted together. And the fresh smell of a fountain is what scientists call negative ions. Negative ions are molecules, in the world of science, that have been charged with electricity. So, are we looking at some kind of, not necessarily technology, but some kind of spiritual awareness that we just don't know about, that was being used in a sort of very esoteric way with the fountain, and perhaps even infusing the water itself with music? I mean, would that make a difference? I'm not sure. Temple actually means time. Temporal comes from the Latin word temporalis, which means of time, and is usually applied to words that mean not having much of it, such as temp, who works at an office for a set amount of time, because temporary situations don't last long. Temple, the name for this area on the side of the skull, comes from the Latin word for time, tempus. Again, official version. The connection may be that with the passage of time, grey hairs appear here early on, or it may relate to the pulsations of the underlying superficial temporal artery making the time we have left here, marking the time we have left here. So that's the official explanation, but I'm going to suggest something else. Is it more likely that the temple of your head is where an individual interprets time? Time is an illusion. It exists in your head. Now, talking of time, Big Ben is the name of the bell, not the clock tower in London. Its original bell cracked shortly after it was put in. Now, Big Ben was completed in 1859, and it was built, we're told, just because. Now, Big Ben overlooks the River Thames, where in 1858, 1 year before Big Ben, the Great Stink took place, and sewage was dumped onto the shores of the Thames, and the smell was unbearable. It leaked methane gas and other gases. Now, Conspiracy or Us, Waste Management and the Great Stink, and I'll put the link in the description. His video, if you haven't seen it, is fantastic. But the video makes an excellent case for an unbelievable official narrative. I believe this event had to do with the blowback of a thermal vent. And below the River Thames, muck and gas was leaked up from a geyser. It wasn't sewage. And this forced the necessity of reinstating a tower to vent it, and the new bell was a precaution to warn of any high-pressure gas, and I have some evidence to back that theory. So, this is the huge ship pump beneath Big Ben. And the bit that I wanted to show you, it's going on about the same incident, the Great Stink. And it is a quote from Dr. John Percy. No sewer gas can, by any possibility, escape from the drains connected with the House. He's talking about the Houses of Parliament, as the gas is effectually exhausted from that drain by a furnace at the bottom of the clock tower, and ascends to the top of the tower, where it passes into the atmosphere. So it is acting as a chimney. And I think there was another piece of evidence here as well on Wiki. So I'll just move it up so you can see. This is all about Big Ben. The when, where, how, what, and so on. And it says, a ventilation shaft running from ground level up to the belfry, which measures 16 feet by 8 feet, was designed by David Boswell Reed, known as the grandfather of air conditioning. It was intended to draw cool, fresh air into the Palace of Westminster. In practice, this did not work, and the shaft was repurposed as a chimney. Now, I don't believe the shaft was repurposed as a chimney. I think it was designed as a chimney. And if we have a look at this and go all the way down the bottom here, you see they know that the furnace is there, even though there are some descriptions that don't mention it and they just say this is on a concrete base. But it's almost as if they're not quite sure why the furnace is there, and they want to pretend it's something other than gas coming up. I mean, we've already been told it is the gas. And it's coming up from underground, and I believe the tower was built for that purpose. It's the reason why it started smelling. It had nothing to do with sewage. And here we have this guy sort of shoveling coal on it, as if it's his job to, I don't know, keep it burning. So, anyway, in effect, they have actually got an eternal flame under the tower that houses the bell of Big Ben. And that shaft goes all the way up. And you can see it going up here to here. And it's going to go up to the bell at the top here. And of course you've got all the vents up there. And I actually read another funny story, and I won't bother you with it now. But because it's one that you can find for yourself. And it's that all of this got painted. And then they found that it was all going mouldy because they hadn't left the vents open. They didn't realise that they had to. I mean, the whole thing could have exploded because of all the gas coming up and all the smoke coming up. So yeah, it does need to be vented. But this is what happens when people aren't aware of the reality of what's going on. But anyway, I thought that was just another piece of information worth adding. So, what is time? And as the word temple suggests, time is in our head. To a large degree, it's a matter of perspective. I'm not saying that the world isn't real and that it's all fake. I haven't got enough evidence to suggest that's true. But I can see how important the way we think about things is. And I think our senses are telling us something about time that we haven't fully understood. And the science calls this perspective relativity. And here's an example. Obsidian glass and relativity. So obsidian glass is formed from an erupting volcano, and it's made of silica and it should crystallize. But black obsidian is so hot, and because of the colour it's roaring in on itself. So black obsidian is so hot that the atmosphere relative to the heat of the magma is freezing. So instead of forming crystals, the obsidian snap freezes and turns to glass. So if you think about that for a minute, because it's responding to the conditions it thinks it's in. Not that it's consciously thinking about it. But anyway, sometimes there are small fragments of the obsidian that begin to adjust to the atmosphere, and they just about manage to form white crystals, and it's known as snowflake obsidian. But the point is, it doesn't matter that the air around the volcano is perceived by us to be hot. In those moments, to the silica, the air is freezing, and the silica physically responds to its experience of the frozen world that it's found itself in. And if you can't quite get that, I have other examples that I'll talk about another time. So, time is quite easily manipulated in small degrees if you think about it. You have stuff in your freezer that is as fresh as the day you put it in there. But if you had identical peas and you put one lot in the freezer and you stuck the other in the microwave and turned it on full whack, you would turn the peas in the microwave to stone, which is the equivalent of accelerating them forward in time from their perspective. And the ones that are frozen, they haven't moved through time at all. Shifting time is going to involve immense heat or immense cold. And that would be the clues as to whether this has been done and when it might have been done. And again, it's something that I'm going to have to go through slowly, but I'm hoping that you will either see it the way that I'm seeing it, or stop me from seeing it that way by pointing out where I'm going wrong, one way or the other. So this is my theory. Now this is an actual photo, and you can go and have a look at this photo yourself. It's of the core from Chernobyl. Now there was nothing wrong with the camera. These men are actually there, and the reason that the camera has picked them up very ghosted is because there is so much heat travelling so fast, it's like bouncing around everywhere. And it's making these men, their molecules are vibrating at such a rate that although to them they're solid, to the camera they've become more like a heat haze. So from the camera's perspective, they're almost gone. If there was just a little bit more heat there, they would be invisible to the camera. Now, to our eye and to the person taking that, the person taking it is also resonating at that speed. So they're just going to be seeing them as physical. But I do wonder if you had a window in on that moment where you're not resonating at that speed, but you're looking at these people that are, would you physically see them like this? CERN, European Council for Nuclear Research. That's all they do. They play with nuclear power. Magnets spinning around copper wires create electric. So imagine the possibility of supermagnets spinning around nuclear waste. What would that generate? When you think of what I've shown you, that it's relatively simple to generate electricity, and look what we can do with it. What could you do with the energy that's generated from nuclear waste? Everything you know about your world has been tailor-made for you by CERN, and do not underestimate their role in everything. Your medicine, food, water, internet, they have messed with it all. Now, this is a pole icebox cube, and the ice cube at Antarctica is a neutrino observatory that belongs to CERN. So they're burrowing deep down into the very coldest point that they can probably find on Earth. Why would they want to do that? Would you be allowed? See, we can't even step foot in this place. They can go and dig great big whacking holes. And we'll discuss what they say they're doing, and we'll read between the lines again another time. If you're interested, let me know. But this is another pole ice box. Time and relative dimension in space. TARDIS. Pole ice box. This is the World Health Organization. So this health organization, which I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with now, this health organization is headed by doctors in league with CERN. This is a doctor in league with WHO. to recap. People were not buried in churchyards. The altars were alternators. The spires were communication towers. The direction of the church is because it's a satellite. Time can be manipulated. Obsidian glass is one of the clues. And this is Alice, a large iron collider experiment. So, I'm just going to wrap up. I'm not going to say any more. I'm just going to show you a few pictures. So, a few minutes longer. My God, nobody's going to watch this. How long have I gone on for? Okay. Anyone that's actually made it this far, wow. You are patient. Thank you very much. Most of you, I'm sure, would just skip through or fast forward, but hey ho. I'll say goodbye for now.